A pleasure to me all at last. And it's once again time for films I'm willing to talk about again. So with this next selection here, I figured we could probably stick to 1999. After all, when my birthday came and went, and sure was quite an occasion to bring along a few unique classics. Yeah, they might as well just be called classics by this point. One of these films in particular that I've always remembered was The Iron Giant. Yeah, that's right. This was actually another case where a book from way back in the day got made into a film. In this case, this was basically the 1968 novel known as The Iron Man. Obviously, not to be confused with Marvel's Iron Man, which still didn't exactly get a movie by 1999. It took a little while later though, but in any case, The Iron Giant was a whole different story. Especially knowing that long after the Iron Man book was published, the Iron Man from Marvel started to catch on much more better than, well, the Iron Giant. But in any case though, the Iron Giant still got himself a film thanks to Warner Brothers from giving us something unique. Something unique that Brad Bird would come up with. He would also be the man to give us other things like The Simpsons, Family Guy, and even the Incredibles films. Even going so far as to voice the character Edna Mode. Yeah. Probably not the best impression, but still. The Iron Giant was still one of his first projects, and boy, did he really start off with a bang. What I simply mean by that was that, as the book gave us, the story goes, as 1957 came around, it was basically at the height of the Cold War, technically. It wasn't at all like the 80s, where it was everywhere. No, the Cold War in the 1950s was a different story. After all, that year was basically the height of a special event known as the space race. This was a period where the countries of the United States and Russia would actually compete against each other in a series of spaceflight tests. America's side ended up failing. Russia would eventually go so far to launch the first ever satellite in their orbit, as well as succeed in completing the first major spaceflight program, in which a chimp was used as the astronaut. Yeah, so basically, animals were the first to take on the spaceflight mission before humans were even allowed to go on that kind of endeavor. But in any case though, The Iron Giant, like I said, takes place in the year 1957, even by the movie standards. It involves a foreign object entering through Earth's atmosphere, crash landing into the water, where a certain fisherman is having trouble finding his way to shore. But he thankfully has a saving grace when finding the lighthouse. Though, it turns out to be two lights. Almost like a set of eyes have come onto him. His boat crashes. He gets one good look at what's ahead of him. Turns out it is some giant standing in front of him. Yeah. He gets swept away by the water and thankfully manages to find the lighthouse, not before crashing on the shore himself. Then that's basically where the movie cuts along to our movie's main character, Hogarth Hughes. A good 11 years old, practically going on to become an adult, but before he does anything like that, 9 years old, 11 years old, the way that he's depicted doesn't entirely matter to me, because some confusion has generated between many people whom love the movie and the book. And the many attempts to try to bring back the Iron Man in a more modernized lifestyle. Most famously with Ready Player One and even the new game Multiverses, which in 2022 was originally made as some sort of test pilot game, but was then discontinued for about 2 years before they brought it back this summer. So, that's your modern fixations on Iron Giant as a whole. But back to the movie though. Hogarth Hughes goes over to the diner where his mother Annie Hughes works, and basically they have a little talk about some things that went down. But Hogarth basically brings along a shoebox with holes in it. And this is a good indicator of what's about to happen. He's about to bring a live animal into the diner and potentially cause some panic. After all, wild animals entering a certain public space is guaranteed to cause some people to become a little uncomfortable. Some might be worse than others. Even to this day, it does seem that with some people, you just can't really seem to grasp the idea that nature might cling on to you before you know it. But in any case though, a bit of ruckus goes down. Hogarth hears a little rumor that goes on about a fisherman having trouble out there in the waters. The rumor spreads around. He eventually comes across a man behind a newspaper who was apparently asleep. He'd probably been waiting on his order for a little too long. But in any case, he tries to get him to help find this animal. A squirrel. Man, of all animals that Hogarth could have brought in to try to bring in as a pet, it had to be a squirrel. Those things are literally what Fireman Sam would even agree with. They're considered live wires, for crying out loud. I mean, it's crazy. Anyways though, after all that goes down, the squirrel does cause quite a bit of a mess that Annie has to basically work late for. Yeah, she has to stick around because of Hogarth's little mistake. But thankfully, once Hogarth does get home, a little phone chat goes down. He eventually realizes he's the man of the house for some time. And well, he takes advantage of this. And how does he do so? He basically grabs whatever snacks he can find, stay up pretty late until around 9 o'clock, according to a literal clock that's sitting on top of his television. He builds himself a small fort and gets comfortable because he is literally watching a crazy, scary alien movie of some sort. Basically, this in-movie movie, basically. It's that kind of cliche that's happened many times over the years. I mean, the only question is, could it get any more better? Oh, in this instance, it actually does a really good job at giving us an effective in-film film that actually could be considered scary. And it does make sense, after all. By the year 1957, there were lots of implementations between sci-fi and thriller. So, in this instance, it's about a scientist and his partner whom are trying to conduct studies on a series of brains. Yeah, live brains. Super sentient type of live brains. In any case though, he loses his keys, grabs them, and finds out that one of the brains is alive and ready to attack. However, Hogarth apparently can't concentrate on this because of a little disturbance that's happening on the roof of the house. He tries to go investigate, tries to head back and see what's going on, and then before you know it, the feed's cut off. The antenna likely has been disrupted. So again, he goes upstairs, tries to walk onto the roof, finds out that the dish is in fact out of line. The antenna is literally out, as in it was taken. He basically looks further with his flashlight, finds a series of tracks leading into the woods, presumably believing that the culprit of this little incident in the house could in fact be invaders from Mars. Yeah, so he basically gears up and then makes his way out there into the woods, armed with a BB gun and a flashlight attached. So yeah, this was a particular point in history where practically everybody was on their knees and also highly on guard. And when you consider a child to have to go out into the woods late at night armed with a seriously dangerous weapon like a BB gun, then you know you have a problem. I mean, look at how we are nowadays. Many of us just know things are going to be okay. We're certainly not under any kind of pretense or belief that we're ever going to be caught in the crossfire of a certain warfare that's going on. No, a lot of times these days, war is none of our business. Though we do sometimes try to support them whenever we can. Anyways though, it isn't long before Hogarth eventually comes across a power station, which is located some distance away from the house. So you could say he spent a lot of time out there. And well, unfortunately, the suspense only gets even bigger. Because the lack of music, in addition to Hogarth venturing out there, well, it builds up to a big moment. A set of eyes apparently point towards his direction and ends up walking towards him. Oh my gosh, like, even today, it's kind of uncalled for. I mean, think about this. If this invader really wanted to do something with Hogarth Hughes, oh man, he'd have to have some serious balls for it. But oh boy, it's a giant. A giant that goes towards the power station and, like, it just takes out an enormous chunk of the station and eats it. Yeah, apparently metal is sustenance for it. And before we knew it, well, the whole station goes corrupt and eventually shuts off, leading to the entire town of Rockwell, Maine to be blacked out. Yeah, Annie Hughes gets home by this point, finds out what happened to Hogarth, and he gone missing, yada yada yada. And then Hogarth attempts to run away, only to find out the giant could be in danger. No doubt because of the electricity. And well, he shuts off the grid, allowing the giant to actually reactivate. And when he does actually get away, bumps into Annie, they both have a bit of a talk, and then head back home. Where the following morning, Hogarth does try his best to not allow word of this to spread to anybody, because it's likely a lot of panic would ensue. Once again, it was this point in history, as well as others that eventually led up to today, where people back in the day were very scared, heightened with fear, and a lot of superstition. It was that point where people think that was better? I mean, you gotta be joking with me. This is the time where it's all better. I mean, we would never assume that people would try to attack us. Invaders from Mars? Psh, you gotta be joking. But in any case, Hogarth tries to get through a day of school, ends with an instructional video on how to survive a nuke, yada yada yada. It's just insane why people would think that stuff like that would happen. But hey, that was just what the problem was about the Cold War. A lot of stuff could have taken place, from US to Soviet territory. Anyways though, after all that goes down, apparently there's more trouble. A tractor apparently is chomped up. An enormous chunk of the front is missing. And the farmer ends up selling it to Dean. That's right, the very same Dean that we saw in the diner earlier. He apparently is a junk man. A guy who owns his own junkyard and collects various scrap to keep up. And well, there also comes along more trouble. Investigations were underway about what happened at the power station. A government agent known by the name of Kent Mansley, whom is played by the one and only Christopher McDonald, comes around to investigate what had happened. And well, it turns out there was an unexplained phenomenon that was occurring. And with all that was going on about aliens and whatnot, especially with all the drama surrounding the space race at the time, all the talks about rocketry and things like that, it's no wonder why people would just assume that space was apparently the next big thing to worry about. And Kent Mansley was no different. He was one of those government agents who would just assume everything was going to go wrong, and that everything would have to be done in order to prevent such seriously big problems from happening, when he doesn't even know the full scope of things or the truth about what's going on. In any case though, he gathers some intel from fellow workers of the plant, and then heads back only to find out his own car had been chomped up as well. Well, he apparently can't gather proof on that either, because it eventually turns up missing altogether. Well, that's when he does realize it's not just a big thing, it's a huge thing in a little place. And it certainly is a common trend, even today, where small towns could actually become the victim of giant catastrophes. Remember what happened in Woodridge, New Jersey? The wreck of the Broker? Or maybe we could talk about Graniteville, South Carolina. where a chlorine gas explosion took place, covering the entire town in chlorine gas and causing 9 people to die. But in the case of Rockwell, Maine, which isn't even a real township in the States, it was fictionalized for both the novel and the film. In any case though, Mansley tries to look further into the stuff, and Hogarth tries to continue on with his life as is, much like anyone else would. Basically, more stuff takes place, and well, Hogarth once again sets out to try to find this giant that he encountered at the station. Well, he actually becomes successful that afternoon, and well, the giant comes into contact with him yet again. Hogarth makes a run for it, but it turns out the giant had no intention of hurting him. In fact, he actually mimics Hogarth's moves. I might as well mention, Eli Marienthal plays the likes of Hogarth Hughes, while the Iron Giant is played by the one and only Vin Diesel. Yes, the very same Vin Diesel whom would play Don in the Fast and the Furious films. Of course, this was 2 years before Fast and the Furious would come out, and many, many, many more years before Fast and the Furious would become such a hit franchise. But in any case, though, Hogarth realizes the giant doesn't want to hurt him. They both become friends after some education for each other. And eventually, the Iron Giant is following Hogarth like a little kid or even a dog. I mean, it's insane. But it's pretty funny, too. When you consider a giant robot is following a kid around, that is impressive. Imagine if something giant were following me around, like a kaiju. I kind of wonder, could that ever happen? Who really knows? Well, railroad tracks show up. Another ensuing moment takes place where the Iron Giant tries to get a meal out of it and actually causes a train to crash into him. I wonder if Thunderbolt 1000 Siren Productions will make a video of that. But hey, I guess it's all up to chance by any means, because the crew of the train try to consider the possibility of a giant middleman they collided with when the tracks were dismantled, and he was trying to fix them up after all, thanks to Hogarth's help. Anyways though, the giant is brought with Hogarth. They hide him in the barn near the house where he lives. And after some other phenomena that go into place, like the giant's hand following him around the house and whatnot, going into the restroom, and then of course with Hogarth eventually going out with the Iron Giant on a nice little night out, they eventually come across McCoppin's Scrap off of Culver Road. Yes, this was the junkyard that, believe it or not, actually had a medley of different foods for the Iron Giant to enjoy. But hey, Hogarth knows about Dean as well. After a little disturbance goes on, Dean wakes up, tries to find intruders, realizes Hogarth is there and invites him inside, lets him know that he's always welcome. He's one of those types of people whom are rather carefree and quite content. I mean, that's probably someone who would probably never exist today. Imagine if someone just went out and said, "Oh, I'm not gonna tell your mama that you left after 5 a.m. in the morning." I mean, would that ever happen here in 2024? Let me know in the comment section below if that's ever happened to you. If somebody just went up ahead and said, as a kid, at least in your eyes, that they weren't gonna do anything about contacting your parents or whatnot. But anyways, it isn't long again before the giant's discovered, this time by both Dean and Hogarth, to be right there in sight. Giant tries to stop them and all that, but they're ended too. Well, thankfully, he doesn't kill Dean, because Hogarth demands him to put him down. Well, they try to talk things over, eventually coming to an agreement that the giant can stay for the night. Hogarth is to come by the following morning and have him moved, at the very least. But little does Hogarth know, once he does get back, right then and there, he tries to get into bed, but he can't. Because his mother calls him down for breakfast. And whoa, a surprise right there was waiting for him. Kent Mansley, at the table. It's a as close as you could probably get to it being possibly Hogarth's father. I mean, it seems to be a good impression, at least, or an imitation of what could have been Hogarth's father sitting at that table, since he is reading a newspaper and trying to enjoy a good breakfast along with the Hughes family. But still, it's pretty weird when you think about it. A government agent living in a civilian's home. That's impressive. But hey, it is Mansley's mission, after all, to find out what is truly behind these phenomenons in the town of Rockwell. Because after all, Washington is already on edge from a number of events that were taking place over the years. I mean, there was the Korean War, there was the space race, there was all the phenomenon about aliens, especially thanks to Roswell. But, you know what though? Like I said, I'm beyond glad that those times are over. Times have gotten simpler. We no longer have to worry about a doggone thing. Maybe a few little problems here and there, like family matters, finances, and of course, trying to find out how to properly handle our everyday routine. But these are little problems that we always have a solution for, no matter what it is. Anyways though, yet another montage takes place. But not before Dean and the Giant get into a bit of an argument, and Hogarth and Mansley agree to go out sightseeing. Well, this montage in particular takes place after Hogarth actually sneaks a laxative into Mansley's ice cream concoction known as a landslide, and eventually, when Hogarth returns to the junkyard alongside, well, the others, they eventually go on a bit of a swim. And again, Mansley is out there looking for evidence, just so General Rogard, his superior, can confirm that there is literally a giant in the town of Rockwell. And well, he finds some clues here and there, and it's all set to the song Searchin' by the Coasters, which is probably one of my favorite songs from that era. Certainly memorable not only because of this movie, but also from other appearances over the years as well, though this was one of the first to make such an impact of the 1950s, as well as the likes of Forrest Gump and other movies of that era as well. But even to this day, we still do have a lot of reasons to have all these different things. Again, though, Mansley comes across incriminating pieces. He comes across that camera that Hogarth had with him on that one day, before the railroad incident took place. He was able to get the photos out. He was able to thankfully recover from his little laxative incident from the diner. And then, of course, Hogarth finally comes home after yet another big day alongside the Giant and Dean, only to find Mansley was apparently waiting for him the whole time, since after all, he now has the evidence to potentially put Hogarth away. Even though he's just a minor, back then, they did not give a crap about minors. Oh boy. Imagine if that persisted today, where minors could be convicted literally as an adult and literally put into the same kind of prison as adults could. Boy, nobody would want to imagine that. Anyways though, it's that classic interrogation scene, but this time a boy is being questioned, heavily, by a government agent. A light being pointed at him, and it's that usual cliche, but done so in a way where it's actually a little disturbing. Because after all, Mansley goes pretty hard on him, makes a lot of physical contact with Hogarth, and literally shows him the same photos that he took of the Giant himself, to basically persuade him into giving away the Giant's location. McCopp and Scrap off of Culver Road. Yeah. So that way, Mansley was able to put Hogarth to sleep, literally. Puts chloroform on his nose. Yeah, it's yet another cliche. That was, back in the day, how they actually put victims unconscious. They put chloroform on a rag and then held it on a person's nose for several seconds. And once they breathed it in, it caused them to fall unconscious. Yeah. It's classic then, because nowadays, there aren't too many ways to actively put someone to sleep that easily. Unless you had a handful of pharmaceuticals. But even then, those would be pretty tough to get a hold of in most cases. Anyways though, Hogarth once again is at sleep. This time, When he does wake up, he finds out Mansley did make a phone call. General Rogart is now sitting in an enormous surplus of tanks, weaponry, infantry, and lots of other equipment. So in that case, an entire military operation is underway with a bit of a manhunt to find the Iron Giant, as well as those responsible for harboring him. Of course, it doesn't seem that Hogarth is under that much trouble, since he technically was the one who provided valuable info for Mansley to then give off to his superiors. So, but in any case though, Hogarth still comes along with Annie Hughes by his side, thankfully. So both of them, even if they do end up getting in trouble for this sort of thing, they probably wouldn't get much punishment. But that's never clear to us. Because once they do arrive at McCobb and Scrap, Dean was right there with the coffee in hand waiting for him. And by coffee, I mean espresso. Coffeezilla. So that was a pretty clever implementation, knowing that Godzilla was 3 years old by the time the Iron Giant's events take place. Anyways, though, they open up the door to the warehouse. The Iron Giant is literally sitting there, all covered in scrap. Basically, a giant sculpture. That's technically the pretense that Dean had set up for him, to stand completely still and disguised like some giant sculpture that was made by an artist. An artist who basically sold off this art to him to keep in the warehouse. And well, a heated argument right there between Mansley and Rogart, and gosh is it funny. He definitely blew millions of American dollars from Uncle Sam out of his butt. Man, that still resonates pretty well with me nowadays because it's amazing. It's well timed right there. And it really shows that the general is so mad at Mansley that he demands him to clean out his desk as soon as he comes back to Washington. Well, goodbye, Mansley, and all that implies. Yeah, that's what Hogarth says. Anyways, though, more things ensue. The Iron Giant unintentionally attacks Hogarth. Literally. He has some kind of laser vision. Dean doesn't know about this, though, that it was an accident. He was basically under the impression that perhaps the Iron Giant did this to him intentionally. But it wasn't intentional. In fact, it was that gun that Hogarth was holding and trying to fire at the giant, causing him to react in a certain way. It's basically a type of emotional response. Whenever a certain point of stimulation occurs, then the opposing party shall react in a certain way, typically in the form of retaliation. It's common with a lot of people in which that they feel like they're being threatened, or if there's a certain attack that's going on to them, even if it's presumed to be a fake thing or even a prank, they still would have the intention of fighting back, knowing how high the adrenaline and hormone levels have skyrocketed as a result of such stimulation. So, after yelling, Giant runs away, Hogarth goes after him, and then Dean goes up on a motorcycle to grab Hogarth and then chase after the Giant. He basically goes out far enough, thankfully, to listen to the call of two boys whom end up dangling for dear life from some binoculars. And thankfully, he saves them. Yes, they land on his hand, he hands them off to their parents, and well, with that, the townspeople finally know who was truly responsible for these different rumors that took place. And well, Hogarth and company eventually catch up as well. Giant confesses that he is not a gun. But again, it's truly at this point where the real show begins. A tank round is fired at the Giant's back, causing him to react and stumble upon the buildings. But oh boy, everybody starts firing at him. Bullets are scattered all over the place, rounds are shot, things explode, it's a mayhem. But hey, the Giant and Hogarth manage to escape successfully. Dean attempts to intervene, demanding they stop firing at him. But unfortunately, Mansley proves to be as much of a fighter himself. So you could say the man who definitely is a horrible person becomes even worse. Because while he does promise Dean to talk to the general about what was truly going on with the Iron Giant and whatnot, what was happening to Hogarth, he actually lies to the general. Yeah, he tells him that the Giant killed Hogarth and is not actually holding him like he's really doing. He's literally protecting Hogarth like this. That's killing him? You gotta be kidding me. I remember when Godzilla from the late 70s show actually did a similar thing. Held two of the characters in his hand just as a means to prevent them from drowning underwater. But in this case, you have them going right for the throat. I mean, that's impressive. That's definitely what you call an add-on to the thrills. I mean, a code red's issued, fighter jets are dispatched, and the Iron Giant eventually turns over after trying not to hit a bus that's nearby. They end up falling off a cliff, and before you knew it, he can fly. He can fly! That's right! The Iron Giant apparently had not discovered this until the last minute. Yeah, that's impressive right there. It's a lot like how when Gohan was at the point of danger and ends up showing a new ability. Or at least with other things that happen in Dragon Ball Z. But still, it's a similar feeling. The Iron Giant gets close to impacting at the bottom of, well, the ocean after falling off a cliff. But apparently he could fly, preventing him from being destroyed along with Hogarth getting killed. They end up flying in the air like Superman. And well, fighter jets come into contact with him, but he does resist, thankfully. Unfortunately, the Giant could only outmaneuver the jets for so long, because a round does eventually hit them. He falls out of the sky, smashes onto the ground, and when he does finally get up, he sees Hogarth just laying there in the snow. Yeah. This was the point where the Giant realized, much like what happened in an earlier scene where two hunters killed a deer and the Giant learns that guns kill. He was under the intention that perhaps Hogarth might have been shot or even killed when they were hit up in the air. So of course the Giant becomes enraged. The bump on his head eventually reverses itself, and eventually he transforms into a living weapon of mass destruction. His right arm becomes a cannon, his left arm becomes a plasma shooter, and the rest of his body converts to that of an enormous, powerful mech. I mean, a walking weapon. That's an impressive feat of engineering. Something that, even if it were considered extraterrestrial, it's insane. We don't really get to hear much about the Giant's origins, though. This is the kind of stuff that has been deemed a bit of a mysterious factor. But there has been plenty of lore speculated by fans of the movie, as well as other points in the franchise. Because, after all, it all started with the book in 1968, and 31 years later, we got a movie, and many more years later, more Iron Giant related stuff would come around, including a signature edition of the film in 2015, loaded with some extras. And then of course, the previously mentioned multiverses and Ready Player One moments that he's featured in. Again, the Iron Giant has had plenty of relevance to this very day, thanks to Warner Brothers getting bigger and even better as time goes on. But still, it's not over yet. While the Giant's out there causing mayhem and destruction for what happened to Hogarth, Hogarth is actually still alive. That's right. When they're all in the car, Dean and Annie try to take him to a hospital, but are stopped by a nearby blockade. Military officials try to escort them out of the town to avoid them getting hurt. It was a potential evac order, but Hogarth still goes straight for the Iron Giant, potentially putting himself at life's risk. So, it was all for the reason that the Iron Giant could in fact be killing people, the very thing that he's been trying to fight against the entire time. But it was mostly because of the help of his friend, Hogarth Hughes. The same Hogarth Hughes that he actually points his gun at, not realizing that he's actually doing something very wrong and needs to stop immediately. But thankfully, he does regain consciousness. He reverts himself to his old self, which at first feels scared. They might not like him anymore for what happened. But Hogarth believes they can both do it. They just have to work with each other to ensure they don't have any more hostility between them and the government any longer. Dean, again, continues to persuade the general to order them to stand down, and thankfully they actually come to that conclusion. So, you would think that this would be the end of all things. Military conflict would no longer persist, and the Iron Giant would be proven to be a good individual whom crashed from an unknown origin. So, oh, but the real trouble is, it turns out they actually had a plan of some sort. You see, Mansley and Rogard were discussing something about something called the Nautilus First Strike capability that was not far offshore. And the Nautilus was basically the name of a giant battleship that was out there alongside the Rockwell shores, out there in the ocean, quite a distance away. This battleship in particular was equipped with a special nuclear warhead that would obliterate anything in its path. And the nuclear explosion would be insane. If you thought that Little Boy and Fat Man out there were unbelievable, this missile put them to shame. But in all seriousness, a dire situation is at hand now. And even the Iron Giant can't believe what's happening. There's no way that the people of Rockwell would be able to survive. Even Rogard himself states that this missile could literally obliterate the town and everybody in it. No fallout shelter that could guarantee survival of any kind. So, the one logical move that has to be made is the Iron Giant actually comes up with a plan. But first, he has a little speech for Hogarth. Simply put, he recalls a certain point where Hogarth literally told him to stay while he goes, no following. He reiterates this exact speech to Hogarth, but rather than it being a simple callback, this is something that Hogarth might as well take seriously. It's these words that resonate with him and allow for him to realize that what's truly going on is something he should not be involved in. So Hogarth does just that. And it's also because the way the Iron Giant is going to tackle this, he's going to fly up into the air, straight up, Superman style, to that missile. While Hogarth just watches, realizing he's about to do the unthinkable. Sacrifice himself to save the people that he's known to care about. Even the government just stood by and watched, while Mansley attempted to escape, but thankfully fails. Well, one final thing resonates with the Giant himself. Superman. Recalling to that night that he and Hogarth read some comic books while in the barn. And then, it happens. He collides with the missile, which explodes in the upper atmosphere, obliterating him in a blink of an eye. Everybody's relieved that they are pretty much out of danger, but even Hogarth and company, they know right on the bat that it's over. This whole ordeal with the Giants pretty much just ends with a simple missile strike from high above the town. However, some time actually passes before eventually a package is given to Hogarth straight from General Rogard himself. Turns out, it's actually one of several pieces that the Iron Giant is composed of. You see, back when that train wreck occurred, the Giant actually has a special power to put himself back together. A simple beacon that erupts at the top of his head, which calls every part back to him. However, this was just one large screw that attaches to his jaw plate, as we saw earlier as well. This same screw was basically given to Hogarth as supposedly a little token from General Rogard, knowing that Hogarth Hughes was the true friend that the Iron Giant himself had prior to these events that transpired. However, one night would take place where Hogarth is in bed and a strange light and sound erupts in his room. Turns out the screw is alive. Yeah, it basically moves to the window, tapping it, hoping to get out. Turns out the giant is actually still alive. Yes, and the screw basically goes out to him after Hogarth opens the window, confirming once and for all that he's not dead. He is somewhere out there in the world. And well, turns out he's up there in the polar ice caps, where his head sits and all of his other parts, including his arms, legs, and other components, are all on the way back to him. It might have taken a bit of time, but in the end, one simple smile tells us that he's not finished with Earth and the many people he's come to care about. Using his powers for good rather than evil really showed how well it pays off. And even more so, willing to sacrifice himself means he became rather selfless. And he might not have remembered very much about his true origin or about what he was originally programmed to do, but this was one big robot with a big heart and a lot of care to the people he's come to know since 1957. As I've said, this certainly would not be the last time that the Iron Giant would ever become a big pop culture hit, because as the years went on and he got bigger in popularity, at least amongst robotics and sci-fi related stuff, with all these new additions, it's quite clear that the Iron Giant is going to be around for quite a while. At the very least, someone could probably try to make a remake of the film or even a sequel to the 1999 film, but amongst all things considered, this was a fantastic film. It has a great cast to it, apart from Eli Marienthal, Vin Diesel, Jennifer Aniston, Michael McDonald, and even Harry Connick Jr. But the thing is, this was not just any film. It was basically an adaptation of a book, but it grew to be much, much more than just that. However, I feel like I've been here for a little too long now, just talking about this one film. And I'm sure that with other movies down the line, there will be a lot for me to say. So, I give this film a nice big 8.7 out of 10.1, which is quite notable by any means. A fair spot for it, as I wouldn't go so far to claim it as a masterpiece. No, not like many films we've seen in the past several years. But the thing is, it probably is not perfect. Even with all the stuff that Brad Bird implemented into it, this was just one great project he put together out of dozens in the past 25 years. I mean, just think about it. Me, the Iron Giant movie, we're both 25 years of age now. And it's come to show that we have a lot to learn about the past quarter century. So, by any means, get yourself a good copy of the Iron Giant Signature Edition, or even play the new Multiverses game, which is official as of today. So, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more content.
I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on you.